seriously popular.
I think it's actually uncivilized that we aren't just allowed to go into hibernation.
What about shorter winter hours, like midday to 4?
I think that's pushing it. Midday to 3. Welcome to the Life of Bryony, the podcast where we tackle life's messier moments. This week, we're diving into a topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention: binge eating disorder. It's the most common eating disorder, but so many people suffer from it in silence, not even realising that what they're going through has a name. My guest today is Jess Griffiths. Jess is a national eating disorder expert, the co-lead of Freed at the Maudsley Clinic. And Jess played a pivotal role in helping me understand my own struggles with binge eating disorder. So I couldn't think of anyone better to have this conversation with.
My mum said to me, I can't do anything about whether you live or die. She looked me in the eyes and said that. And she said, I'm taking my hands off your life.
Unpacking the truths and myths about binge eating with Jess Griffiths right after this. I saw some of Wicked because I wasn't aware that Wicked was such a very, 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 very long production. So long indeed that it's had to be split into 2 parts, I believe. So me and my best friend Laura, we thought it would be a really great idea to take all of our kids to see Wicked on a rainy, windy, horrible Saturday afternoon. Like, what better way to spend a winter's afternoon with your kids at the weekend? And so off we traipsed with all of our kids. I've only got one, she's got 3, and her youngest has just turned 3. And she loves a witch or a sort of Glinda, sort of magical fairy person. So we thought, great, this will be perfect. But I feel like it should come with a warning that it's a very long film, because it's like, it's obviously beloved of many people of all ages across the world. But it is, it's a PG. I feel like young kids, I don't know what this says about me. I'm blaming the 3-year-old for us getting up and walking out after an hour and a half, when really it's my inability to sit still. And I'm sure I didn't get fidgety during the Titanic, and now I think when they do screenings of that, they have to put breaks in. Anyway. So there we were, and not much had happened, I have to say. And the 3-year-old was getting very fidgety, but I thought, well, maybe it'll be fine. We'll manage to distract her. And I Googled Wicked running time. And I realised that we were barely out of the opening credits, basically. We were barely out of the opening credits. And I showed it to my friend and she started laughing. She started laughing at how long the film was. It's nearly 3 hours, I think. And we were like, there is no way this child is going to sit still. We all left. And we weren't loving it. What I've enjoyed more about, I love a musical, and I love a musical about outsiders and exploring the nature of good and bad, as Wicked does. However, I think I've enjoyed more all of the sort of wild, crazy press around it and all the reels of Ariana and Cynthia kind of crying and hugging. I've got a lot of joy just from that. So we didn't even get Defying Gravity, which feels terrible. But I guess when it comes out on DVD, on VHS, on streaming, we can watch the next 2/3 of it. The ability to sit still and focus on one thing for a prolonged period of time, I find has been completely destroyed. I definitely could do it when I was a teenager and I'd go and watch a movie, and I wasn't used to looking at my phone and also watching a screen, and it's double screening, sometimes triple screening we've got going on, and obviously in the cinema you can't do that. And I'm a bit horrified by my inability to sit still with my own, not even with my own thoughts, with a wildly colourful and gorgeous cinemascape in front of me, such as the world of Oz, and still I am like, I can't do this, need to leave. What is the perfect film length? Is that the reason we're not going to the cinema anymore, and that TV series are taking off because they're, max an hour? and we can just kind of stop them halfway through. I love the exact 43 minutes of a Grey's Anatomy episode. It is perfect. One of those a night. A Grey's Anatomy a day keeps the doctor away. I don't know. You let me know. Drop me a message. All the contact details are in the show notes.
What is... Dax, are you?
Tracking all our cars on Carvana Value Tracker on all our devices? Yes, Kristen, yes, I am.
Well, I've been looking for my phone for...
In Dax's domain, we see all. So we always know what our cars are worth.
All of them?
All of them. Value surge, trucks up 3.9%.
That's a great offer.
I know. Sell?
Sell.
Track your car's value with Carvana Value Tracker today.
Yeah, sure thing. Hey, you sold that car yet?
Yeah, sold it to Carvana.
Oh, I thought you were selling to that guy.
The guy who wanted to pay me in foreign currency, no interest, over 36 months? Yeah, no. Carvana gave me an offer in minutes, picked it up, and paid me on the spot. It was so convenient.
Just like that.
Yeah?
No hassle.
None.
That is super convenient.
Sell your car to Carvana and swap hassle for convenience. Pickup fees may apply.
If you're enjoying the podcast, hit follow now to stay connected and never miss an episode. I can guarantee you it'll be the best decision you've made all day. I'm so happy today to be chatting to Jess Griffiths. Jess played an absolutely pivotal role in my continued recovery, actually, from binge eating disorder. And whenever I write about this subject, I am bombarded with messages from people asking for me to shed more light on it. And that's why I really wanted to do this episode, because so little is known about binge eating disorder, and there is so much shame attached to it, and yet so many people experience it. I think the other special thing about Jess is that her insights are grounded in her own personal experience of recovery from her own eating disorder. So not only does she have real expertise on this subject, but she also has that kind of very empathetic, compassionate, personal experience of it. So this episode is for all of you who have got in touch with me and very bravely shared your own experiences with binge eating disorder. And I really, really hope it helps. Jess.
Hi.
Jess Griffiths.
One and only.
Eating disorders expert, author of Eating Disorders, The Basics. You have like an official title at the Maudsley Clinic in South London, don't you?
Yes, so I'm the national co-lead for FREED, which is the first episode rapid early intervention for eating disorders. I will say it only once.
Gosh. You used to be like the head of information at BEAT, which is the eating disorders charity.
Clinical director at BEAT, yeah.
Which is how I met you. You were also, for some time, my therapist treating my binge eating disorder. And it was because of you that I realised I had binge eating disorder. And I wanted to do an episode on this because every time I've written about it or spoken about it, I am inundated with messages from people asking me about my treatment and how I got help and how I sought help. And I've always been kind of very like, oh, I got a therapist. And then I've never really spoken about it. But then I've done Insta Lives with you before and, you know, sort of obliquely referenced, you know, how we know each other. But Jess, you were my therapist when it came to binge eating disorder. So I wanted to have you on to talk about this illness, which doesn't get spoken about all that often. It is an eating disorder. It is, we think, the most common eating disorder.
Yeah, I mean, it was only recognised as a mental health diagnosis in 2013.
Really?
So, I mean, that is not very long. So I think it's far more prevalent than we even recognise, yeah.
So just quickly, before we go into kind of my lived experience and your lived experience of eating disorders as well, can you talk me through what the definition of a binge eating disorder is?
Yeah, so I think it is typically driven by emotional distress. So it's not just comfort eating, it's not just having an extra chocolate bar. It is something where you eat an enormous amount of food in a very short period of time. You might not even enjoy eating the food, but it feels completely out of control and you'll eat anything to hand. It's not just eating typical things that you would enjoy, it can be associated with weight and shape concerns. But actually underneath it, in terms of the psychological traits, it's not very different in terms of the other eating disorders. So there's quite often perfectionism, low self-esteem. A lot of those underlying things are very similar to all the eating disorders. And it's not unusual for someone with anorexia or bulimia to then progress on to binge eating disorder. But it is a mental health condition. It plagues your mindset, your thoughts. It takes over your day. People tend to have rules around what's good and bad food. They quite often start a day thinking, I'm going to be good today.
Oh my God, this resonates.
It's miserable, and you're thinking about food all the time. It is such a hard disorder to live with. And not only do you have all of that going on, but you get shamed for
Putting on weight.
Yeah.
As a
Or
result.
if you are living in a larger body, the weight stigma is just colossal. But actually, you can be any weight and have binge eating disorder. People can be normal weight, ranging into, obviously, living in a larger body and overweight.
It's really interesting because in my teens and 20s, I suffered from bulimia, and I really knew what that was. And I knew while I was doing it that was an eating disorder. It was a pattern of binging food and then purging it by vomiting, sneaking off. And it was all encompassing for many years of my life, and something I didn't talk about or didn't admit to anyone that I just saw as quite normal. And it had physical impacts. I lost a tooth. My face was, like often spots, and the stomach acid that you're constantly bringing up is obviously terrible for you and your mouth. Anyway, the whole thing, there was a point in my late 20s, early 30s where I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing this because this is so awful. What I'm doing to my body is absolutely terrible. And definitely once I had my daughter, I was like, my body is incredible. It can do this amazing thing. And I have been treating it like a dustbin, essentially. I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not engaging in this behavior anymore. And I had a period of very normal relationship with food, and obviously I put on weight because I was no longer vomiting my food up, and I had a child and all of that stuff. And then I got sober, and I realised how much alcohol and drugs were able to kind of quiet my feelings about food. Yeah. And during the pandemic, you spoke about it there, the food obsession became kind of all-encompassing. And I can see now what was going on. I was about 2.5 years sober when COVID came in, and that was just an extraordinarily
the
weird.
timing of that, though.
Yeah, but I was so desperate to I was like, I'm not picking up a drink, and I was really proud of that. And around me, people were like, we saw it was people really took to alcohol during those lockdowns. No judgment. But while I was like, oh, I'm still I'm sober, thank God I'm sober, I realised I'd fallen head first into this other thing, which I guess was broadly speaking food addiction, which I now see was binge eating disorder. And as you said, it wasn't just like an extra chocolate bar, an extra packet of crisps. It was like vast amounts of food in short periods of time, for me, often in the dead of night.
Yeah.
And I was going down to the fridge and I was eating things like uncooked cooking chorizo. So, essentially raw sausages. And I was like, what the fuck? Mm-hmm. And huge amounts of crisps. Mm-hmm. I could probably get through, the number doesn't really matter, but 18 of those bags of crisps or something, or quite a few big extra ones. And it was the only thing that could quieten my head in the dead of night during those times. And I remember going into the bin as well at one point. And I remember at the time, it was I was like, it's okay because I'm not throwing this up. I'm not throwing this up. So this is okay. Mm-hmm. But why does it then not feel okay? I felt the shame. And like you said, I felt that thing of I would wake up every morning and be like, today I'm going to be good. I realise now, and you pointed this out to me later, that I would then enter this sort of almost pattern of restricting during the day to try and be good, which would then lead me to binging later on. I was writing a book at the time, No Such Thing as Normal, it was like a practical guide to mental health and getting help for mental health issues. And and I interviewed you about eating disorders generally. And I remember exactly where I was when we had that conversation. And I remember you saying to me, oh, please, would you also talk about binge eating disorder? And I was like, what? And you said, yeah, it's probably the most common eating disorder there is, and nobody talks about it. And it was like this penny dropped that I was like, oh, this is what's going on with me at nighttime. It was like what I'd call like a sort of a moment.
It was just one of those universe moments of bringing two people together. It was very powerful.
It was really interesting for me because, and I don't know if this relates to anyone listening, but I felt a huge amount of shame about it because there's lots of stuff tied up with it. And you spoke about this before, like the weight stuff, although that wasn't so much for me. It was more the kind of like, I didn't feel physically good after you eat that amount of food. You feel physically bad. And it felt similar to when I had a drinking binge, you know. So that was for me. And it wasn't because I genuinely, weight is it's a weird thing for me. It doesn't bother me, but I know it does for a lot of people, you know. And you said this really interesting thing to me, which was that if your reason for wanting to treat your binge eating disorder is motivated by wanting to lose weight, then you're not going to get to the bottom of it. And I thought that was a really important and profound thing. And it's about this value that we put in weight and our self-esteem being linked to a figure on a scale is sort of what, in a way, is sort of at the heart of a lot of eating disorders.
The over-evaluation and perceived value of your weight and how it relates to your identity and your self-worth. I mean, when that takes over and becomes the focus, it's never going to end well.
What I found so hard about it, and what I think a lot of people find really hard about it, is that, you know, in a way, getting sober was not easy. Getting clean and sober was obviously not easy. Like, rehabs wouldn't exist if it was. But the thing about getting sober and clean is that I don't have to drink alcohol or take drugs to stay alive, but I do have to eat food. And so there's that amazing, powerful phrase in eating disorders treatment, which is that it's like taking a tiger out for a walk 3 times a day.
Yeah. Managing your physical hunger. It is so complex because it's not black and white. It's like, because you have to learn to eat.
So I genuinely felt with you, Jess, that was what happened. I realised when we started our treatment that I was essentially a 41-year-old woman learning what was normal, how to eat, and that it was okay to eat 3 meals a day and snacks in between. And, you know, this points as well, doesn't it, to this incredibly fucked up society that like disordered eating is so normal now.
I mean, as a mum of 2 teenage girls who actually have a really good relationship with food and their bodies, touch wood for now, having implemented those principles, but hearing what's going on in their peer groups and generally in society, I mean, it is savage.
What do you hear?
Oh my gosh, I mean, it's worse than ever, isn't it? I think, you know, in terms of body image and, you know, it's trendy for kids not to eat lunch at school, you know. Yeah. I mean, it veers in between that and self-harm, but generally, you don't eat at school. It's quite a lot of the narratives that I see floating around. And there's no one just giving that overarching message of no food is good or bad. You need to eat food regularly and exercise. You know, it's not rocket science, but it doesn't sell. But that is the main message. Eat regularly, exercise regularly, don't diet, because that really disconnects the whole mind-body connection. And it will be okay. And that's all I've done with my kids. And at the moment, we're great and they're fine.
I mean, you've experienced an eating disorder yourself.
Yeah. And I think being a mum, you kind of think, oh, you know, am I going to pass anything on to them? And I think, you know, when they were younger, I was really worried about that. But then I was like, okay, I can't fight genetics, but I can give them the skills they need to navigate this. So once I realised that and just thought, okay, let's not get into the kind of being a perfect mum, good enough mum, let's give them the skills. You know, things shifted and I was like, no, that's my job as a parent. And, you know, speaking to them about my own experience, you know, each one of my children, because we've got 3, has got to that moment where I told them and they can't really believe it because, you know, I'm so different now in terms of my personality. I mean, yeah, I just totally embrace life.
There's a massive disconnect between the mum they see now who is in recovery from an eating disorder. Can you talk to us a bit about your own experiences and what life was like before you went into recovery?
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about eating disorder support, because I had my own eating disorder for about 10 years. So from the age of 11 to 21. But at the age of 11, I was in a grammar school, self-harming. I didn't even know what self-harm was. But actually, my eating disorder started with binge eating disorder.
Okay.
Which is why it's so close to my heart, is because I can see now that that was what was going on for me. And, you know, I was depressed. But then, you know, became more and more unhappy with my body size because I put weight on. And so got to the point where I was like, right, we need to do something about this. And was the best, you know, weight loss person ever, because I had that high achieving, driven, determined personality, which meant then like plunged into anorexia.
I think this is a really interesting thing that I hear a lot in my own recovery, talking to other alcoholics and addicts and whatever. And you mentioned it, that it started as a child with binge eating, because I realised actually that long before I picked up a drink or a drug, I realised what I was doing as a very little girl was trying to numb myself with food. And I would eat, this is really weird, Frankfurters, the Herter Frankfurters that were in the fridge. And I would eat like 2 packets of them. But it's a very common thing because it is the first way. Food is often the first way we learn how to control the way we feel.
And communicate to the world as well.
And control our parents. Say, no, I'm not eating this.
Yeah. So in a sense, I think 11, you know, you're going through the stages of puberty and my body was changing. And, you know, I suppose there were kind of ideals around in my family. And my mum, I love her to bits, but she was a serial dieter. It's just, I think, the way she'd been brought up. And so I felt like I was meant to look a certain way. But of course, then when I started restricting food, but then I find myself binging because it wasn't only driven by hunger then, it was driven by the depression underneath as well. And the more you get into that cycle, the more you start to really not like yourself. And so I remember absolutely pummeling myself all the time, every breath I took. That's how much I disliked myself. And that was the horrible darkness underneath it all.
So that went through from 11 to 21?
Yeah. So then I went to see the school nurse and I lied and said the cat scratched me. But I was actually asking for help, self-harming, but I didn't really get any help until I developed anorexia.
What was the kind of turning point?
Well, I think for me, making sense of actually what was healthy for me was a huge part of the journey. So I think because I had an experience of being overweight, I was absolutely petrified of being overweight again. So I kept myself at a very low weight. I'm not going to talk about numbers because of that. But what I realised was the body I'm in is not meant to be at a low weight and it can't function healthily. So I had a moment where I can't even conceive of it now. I did all kinds of things to lose weight or maintain my low weight, which were really dangerous. Ended up then in A&E.
Right.
Heart palpitations, heart problems, because, you know, when you try and lose weight, you know, it can affect your muscle mass. And I just had this moment after my mum said to me, I can't do anything about whether you live or die. This is my mum. She looked me in the eyes and said that. And I was like, And she said, I'm taking my hands off your life.
Wow.
And my mum's a nurse. Like, she'd done absolutely everything to read about eating disorders to support me. But there was something in that shifted the emphasis of, okay, it is down to me. Only I can do this. And about 2 weeks later, I just had this moment where I realised that I was pummeling an already hurting person.
Yeah.
Because that's what addiction is. It sticks a knife in again and again. And whilst it provides temporary relief, it does work, doesn't it? Just for a nanosecond. All those layers of what you haven't processed get bigger and bigger. And the shame and the disgust and the self-punishment you feel grows and grows. And I don't know where it came from, but I just thought there has got to be more to life than this. And around that time, because my life, I can kind of play out through the songs that were popular at the time. Right. That's how I channel my emotions. So it was the Robbie Williams song, Feel. I want to feel real love.
Yeah. Come
on over here. I want to contact the living. I felt like I was just existing. I felt like I was a robot. And I suddenly realised I have got some worth in this world. Oh, it makes me a bit emotional thinking about it, because, you know, from that moment I haven't looked back. It's been like, I am on this earth and I'm stuck with me, so I might as well like myself and look after me. That revelation was so powerful. I still don't want to put any weight on though.
Yeah.
Like, it took years of therapy for me to agree, because I was so afraid. But once I did realise, and, you know, I wasn't having periods, I had a bone scan done, I had the hips and spine of like a 70-year-old at the age of 21. I was like, well, my body's not really coping. And then I was like, right, I've got to do it. I mean, I've got size 9 feet. I live in a larger body. So BMI scales are bollocks for me.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that a bit, because we set so much stock in the body mass index, which is the kind of metric by which all of our health is judged.
Yeah.
And actually, we know it's dated, it's racist, it's all sorts of things, you know. And I think this is the thing, isn't it? We try and put a vast population of people into very strict measures. And I guess
Based on some guy who wrote it like hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. And it's
bonkers.
It's kind of like, you know, we hear this all the time, rugby players who are incredibly fit, who are morbidly obese or whatever, according to the BMIs. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is really important, is that what you said there was that it took years and years of therapy for you to start to get well. And I hear this so often, and I look back at my own journey of recovery, and I think we're so desperate for like instant cures and like make me better and make me normal, you know. And actually that thing that I want to say to people who are on this, you know, journey of, I sound so corny now, but this journey of healing is that, you know, it does take time, you know, and you need to be, you know, you need to give yourself time and give yourself patience, you know, be patient with yourself and with that little girl inside you that, you know, you spoke to there, where you were like, I can't keep pummeling this person because I'm not gonna carry on if I do that.
Yeah. And I think that's it, you know, and I could get controversial, but it's just, I'm sure, fine.
Yeah,
you know,
do, please.
Well, you know, our healthcare system, A, is struggling, but B, is centred around cognitive behavioural therapy.
Yeah.
And there are obviously some great elements with that, but I think it is a nice cheap sticking plaster to manage symptoms, and I think we need to get to the roots. I mean, early intervention
to go deeper.
Oh my gosh, yes, because that takes more time.
By that you mean looking at, you know, what is at the bottom of why we might go through life with these unhelpful beliefs about ourselves.
Yeah,
because I do think that's, for me, when I talk about to people, when people come to me and say, could you recommend a good therapist for OCD or binge eating or whatever? And what I've realised being in recovery is that actually the most helpful form of therapy that I have had, and which actually I think you should have before the CBT gives you the practical skills. Yeah. But what I really needed was to be able to sit down with myself and look back on my past and my childhood and see why it was that I had developed these kind of unhelpful coping mechanisms. Yeah. The other thing was I wasn't ready for that.
That's the thing. And like I say, CBT has its place.
Yeah.
But I'm in the business. Let's do a thorough job. I don't like the thought of sending someone off and then just transferring on to another way of coping.
Yeah, which happens. It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, there's lots of reasons for that. But I would love to see, I'm loving the fact that you said let's do a more thorough job and that therapy can take years, because I think we need to hear more of that. I think. But really
also, I think we feel this sort of like, almost like we're being disloyal to our families. And I have to say that you can look at your childhood. It's okay to say, okay, this is, it's not being critical. It's just saying, well, this is how humans are. We all make mistakes.
Yeah. I would recommend for my kids, and both my girls have had therapy, because I'm like, they've got to deal with me, right?
Yeah. Well, oh my God. Yeah. My daughter has had some, you know, because I'm honest, I was in active addiction until she was 4. And if we look at, you know, and I think lots of people see eating disorders actually as addiction issues, and they are often treated in the same sort of facilities. While I was alcohol sober or whatever, but, you know, I've had experiences with food that weren't healthy.
Yeah. And there is no perfect parenting. I think that's for me that I've really been on a journey with, of like, I can only do the best I can do and it won't be perfect, and they're individuals, but let's give them the skills. Let's not be ashamed of our flaws. Let's just be open about it. And that's, you know, what I've tried to do.
I do think also it's not moving into a position of fear when you see your child perhaps exhibiting qualities that might point towards disordered eating.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is an element of, actually, if you confront it and say, well, that's not actually healthy, but it's okay because we live in a society that doesn't necessarily encourage healthy eating or healthy attitudes towards food. Let's talk about it. So, instead of like almost shaming the child for feeling
100%.
it.
So yeah.
Don't feel that. No, don't. That's bad. Oh, well, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Because whilst I would say my girls are doing quite well, we've had plenty of conversations around that. And there's been times where they've experimented with things, because they all will, you know, and it's how you support them to understand that, to respect their body, but yeah, not be frightened or ashamed. I think it's where, you know, shame, if you see something in your child as a failure in you.
Yeah, I mean, but also it's that thing of like, it's not about you.
No. And I think for me, having learned that, I was like, all right, just tackling it and having boundaries around it. And that's okay. But generally, that openness, I think for me, living, you know, my personality growing up was that I kept everything on the inside. Like, I didn't talk to anyone, which was part of the reason why I got an eating disorder. So, you know, I'm always kind of encouraging the girls to open up. Yeah, I think that's what we try and do as a family.
So going back to binge eating disorder, and anyone listening who, I think I have this, what do I do next? What I was so amazed by, going back to that thing of like, wow, I'm 41 years old and I'm basically learning how to eat normally, you know. What's really interesting, and I thought we could talk a little bit about the traps that people fall into that makes it very much harder for them. So I know that lots of people, if they're brave enough to go to a doctor and say, I think I have binge eating disorder, probably what will happen is they'll get put on a diet, which is the worst thing that you can do. If you keep thinking diets are going to solve your binge eating disorder, actually, they're probably making it worse.
Yeah, because that psychological distress combined with physical hunger, oh my gosh, that's, you know, those two things combined are the worst thing you can do for someone with binge eating disorder. And the thing is, when we work together, that regular eating, you actually stabilise how much you eat rather than having these kind of blowouts, and learn to get in sync with your body again and connect with what it needs. But yeah, it is torturous, you know, to be in that position where you believe you should be on a diet, you're hungry, but you're also emotionally starving.
Yeah. So talk to me about that, how it is about, I always remember you saying to me, you know, who's meeting your needs? And I was like, what? What do you mean? Like, well, no one. I mean, I meet my needs. You know, I mean, who's me? You know, how are you getting your emotional needs met? And having to sit and really think with that. And the other thing was, one of the things I found quite healing is just really being able to get to grips with food and the way I eat it and the way I consume it. And I remember you saying, you have to sit at the kitchen table and eat a meal with your husband. And I was like, what? Without your phones, without any, you know, and I think a lot of us get stuck in that sort of, I was like, I don't know if I have a kitchen table.
It was your face when I said it to you, like, what is this alien think you?
Well, no, because, but then I realised how much every day eating food in front of the telly with my phone was like a way of numbing myself.
Yeah.
And when you actually sit down and eat and have a conversation and take your time, you're like, you realise how your needs are met quite interestingly.
Yeah, but it's both. It's that kind of connection with your family, but it's also stomach and brain connection, because when you're eating as a family and you're talking, you tend to eat a lot slower as well.
Yeah.
And we know that for people with eating disorders, their receptors in their stomach might be a bit slower to tell their brains that they're full.
Yes, definitely.
So it's really good to encourage slower eating, and the best distraction is having, well, a child there and your family. So, but it's also the meaning of it, of connection. I think food is something, it brings people together, and we've lost that meaning, I think.
Wow.
What's up?
I just bought and financed a car through Carvana in minutes.
You? The person who agonized 4 weeks over whether to paint your walls eggshell or off-white bought and financed a car in minutes?
They made it easy. Transparent terms, customizable down and monthly. Didn't even have to do any paperwork.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Hey, have you checked out that spreadsheet I sent you for our dinner options?
Finance your car with Carvana and experience total control. Financing subject to credit approval.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
I think it's so interesting how disordered eating shows up in ostensibly healthy ways. And we could spend several episodes of this podcast talking about the world of podcasts out there, which are all about, should you be eating seed oils? You know, like why you need to cut this from your diet to make you, and the weird American accent I've just given this podcast host is not me putting shade at anyone in particular. But there is this whole world of like disordered eating masked as wellness out there now, I think.
Oh my gosh.
And, you know, we're measuring our blood sugar levels constantly. You know, like, well, what does that tell me? It tells me that my blood sugar reacts when I have a pizza or a piece of chocolate, which is what it should do. It should spike. There's this whole kind of like, this whole world of very disordered eating that has been normalized. And I have to be really careful to sort of not get sucked into that whole like, oh, ultra processed food, bad, bad, bad. Now, undoubtedly, there will be an element of how ultra-processed food will contribute to binge eating disorder because it has, you know, a lot of it's been created to be like Pringles, literally, once you pop, you can't stop.
But I think, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but the research investment into obesity, I mean, I don't know what the difference is, but the small amount of research that we have into binge eating disorder, it pales in comparison to obesity. So all the research that's coming up around ultra-processed foods is driven, you know, and there almost can be two separate research wells, but the crossover is massive and we're trying to join forces.
And no one wants to talk about how actually all of these illnesses are illnesses of a culture in which people need to numb themselves.
And they make money and they drive perfectionism. So if we all know we're not good enough, you know, what a great way to control us all.
We're getting very, very, very...
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
We're going quite revolutionary. Anyway, let's talk a bit about weight loss injectables, as they have become known. Wegovy, which is the form of Ozempic for people that use it for appetite control or whatever. Mounjaro, I think there's that another one. Semaglutide. Anyway, these are all over the news. People talk about them all the time. It's such a fascinating conversation. And I really wanted to have this with you because on the one hand, you have people that are abusing these drugs, by which I mean people that are don't qualify on the metrics on the BMI as obese and who don't need to lose weight, you know, who are using it for disordered eating purposes, right? So we have that world, But on the other hand, and this is really interesting, and this is where I want to get into it, is I have friends who would class themselves as binge eaters or who would say that a lot of their lives have been blighted by feelings of shame around their disordered eating patterns, who have started to take it and who have said that it has been the most liberating experience because suddenly they eat just like a normal person 3 times a day and it switches off that noise. And that's interesting. And that is really worth having a conversation about. You know, I'm often asked, could you write a piece saying how much you look down on people taking Ozempic? And I'm like, I'm not here to shame. You know, everyone has their reasons. Yeah. As an eating disorder expert and specialist, what are your views on these drugs?
Yeah. So I think anything that's going to perpetuate the disordered eating, not great. And it being abused for people who I would say are in a healthy weight range, what they would consider, not necessarily BMI, but, you know, they are healthy. That's not safe.
Just to lose a few extra pounds.
Not safe, not safe.
To look red carpet ready, as we hear about celebrities doing.
However, I think for those who are physically compromised by being overweight, I think we really need to hold them in mind that that is who I assume this is made for. And what was the clincher for me was I was working with someone with binge eating disorder, and I've worked with a few people, but I tend to work with the other eating disorders. And we can get to this stage where, due to their size, they're not able to exercise. And if you're not able to exercise, then you get to this plateau of not being able to lose weight. It's actually impossible. And I found it really interesting. I was working alongside a dietitian, and she did the whole proper, intake and assess, actually it's impossible for this person to lose weight. I was like, oh my gosh, that's really hard, knowing that you're stuck in this position. So I suppose in that kind of scenario, to me, to have something that supports the mindset, quietens down whatever's going on. And I think we don't know enough about the brain to really understand what that is, to enable them to get physically well. I can't see how we would refuse that, because that's health for them. And health is not just physical health, it's mental health. And I think how you balance those things is completely different for every person. I never come along with a standard of, right, you must do this, because each person and how they relate to their health is different. When I worked with you, it was different, but we worked with your understanding on it. And so for those people, really who are struggling with their weight, who can't lose it, they would describe to me that every moment of every day is a trigger. Sitting in a chair here. Yeah. That's an emotional trigger.
Being fat shamed, literally by the environment around you, not just by people, but by
cinema. Going to the cinema, automatically, I don't fit in the chair. The emotional triggers around that, I can't imagine. However, I do have a close family member who is in that position and has recently started saying it, and I am blown away, because when they said to me, the noise is gone, and experiencing the amount of shame they have in their, once again, I get emotional. I am an emotional being. I'm okay with it. When you know how tough that has been, how hard, the dark days they've been through, and they have that bit of relief to think, oh, maybe it wasn't me. Maybe it wasn't my lack of willpower. Maybe,
Well, also this whole talk of willpower, it just annoys me because, in a way, it takes a lot of willpower to continue punishing your body in the ways that we do, be it binge eating, drinking, taking drugs, gambling, whatever the addictive behavior happens to be. And there is sort of, maybe there is a bit of my brain chemistry that just literally makes it harder for me to be moderate, whatever that fucking word is. But I do think also it may switch off the brain noise, but what it won't ever switch off is that understanding of your own psychology. And I think that's really crucial for life generally, just generally for your resilience as a human being. This is why I recommend therapy to anyone, not just the unwell. In fact, therapy is amazing when you're well, because it's like, oh, I can do this now and I can keep this in my armory for times when life gets tough. But what it can't give you is that understanding of your own psychology and why you might resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms from time to time.
And they're also connected, and figuring out those connections are so important to piece it all together. I mean, it's a corny analogy, but it's the classic therapist phrase of piecing together the jigsaw puzzle. And that's how I see what we do as therapists, is piece that together, but also then impart the skills so you don't need us, until you maybe, a burst of therapy later on, because I'm always looking for an excuse to go back. I love therapy too. But it's piecing together. And I would say the other thing about the brain chemistry stuff is, neurodivergence, like ADHD and eating disorders, autism and eating disorders. We know there's massive crossover and how that affects, the brain processing. So there's so much I don't know and so much we don't know. However, I think we just need to be embracing, I think of people's distress, how they feel, what they want to work on, and not make judgments about that. It's different for different people and how they view their health, and how you piece that all together and connect it back. It's a journey to go on.
It is a journey to go on. And for me personally, it was really interesting because I remember when I had to go to rehab to stop drinking and taking drugs because it was killing me. I remember food really came up then, but I remember a counsellor very wisely saying to me, well, you've got to deal with whatever's going to kill you first, right? And at that point, it wasn't cooking chorizo.
Mm-hmm.
It was cocaine.
Yeah.
And it was Carlsberg, sticking with the alliteration there. And for a time, I think food, it helped me to get sober in a way, you know, and I always say to people that come to me, lots of times women come to me and they go, I'm trying to get sober, but I'm really ashamed by how my food has gone off the scale. And I'm like, give yourself a break, you know? And for me, it was like me being able to notice the binge eating was in itself a symptom of my recovery, because I couldn't even look at it before because there was too much other noise above it. And it's like, I see this as kind of like peeling layers of the onion off, as we call it in recovery. But like, oh, okay, so I dealt with the alcohol and the drugs. And then about 2.5 years in, I was able to look at the food. And then I got rid of the smoking, you know, and then the food came up again a bit. And then, you know, like, oh, you know, I'm like, I find it really fascinating to be able to notice in myself how my brain will sort of try and latch on to another addictive behavior, but how it's become along the way a lot calmer and a lot less needy of that, you know, and it is a journey. And, you know, maybe I will go into gambling or something, or, you know, like, I don't know, but I don't think so. I feel a lot like calmer.
This is good to hear. I think also the connection between substance abuse and eating disorders, we need to name that because it is so common, you know, that people will transfer onto eating disorders, something to look out for. And I mean, we seem to have 1 million rehab centres in Bournemouth for some reason, which is where I live. And I've been in there to talk about food because it's really important, actually, I think, for people in rehab to have education around how it impacts their food, because I think then, you know, they need to understand that that's common and it does happen and not to be ashamed of it.
So we will be back later in the week with a bonus episode of The Life of Bryony, The Life of You, where Jess will be answering some very practical questions about getting help for an eating disorder. But if it hasn't come out yet, or you're listening now, Jess, if someone is listening and thinks they have an eating disorder or suspects someone they love might have an eating disorder, what is your practical advice now as for next steps?
So the first thing is to reach out for support. And we're in a challenging time where there isn't access to services. However, Beat has got a free helpline, lots of ways to contact, and their helpline advisors can really guide you through how to access treatment. And they've got leaflets on taking something to your GP so you don't even have to say what's going on.
Right.
But what I would say is you've got to get on that road. You've got to ask for help. It's very unlikely that you can do it on your own. And there are people that will, you know, walk alongside you. You can go to your GP as well. And, you know, we would encourage that to get a referral to an eating disorder service. However, like I say, I think Beat's a really good source of knowledge. And then I think also, you know, for family members, we have probably around 1.5 million, 1.75 million people with eating disorders in the UK. But if you take their support network into account,
it's a huge amount of people.
6, 7, 8 million. So we know that people do much better when their carers are skilled and understanding in eating disorders.
And know how to talk about them.
Yeah.
So actually, just quickly, are there some things that, you know, are absolute no-goes that you shouldn't, like, say to someone with an eating disorder? Like, don't force them to eat, or, yeah, are there any kind of key things that come to mind?
If you're recognising someone's got an issue, the worst thing you can do is just point out their behaviours, because they already feel ashamed of them. So it will only pour on shame and they'll disconnect from you at that kind of recognition stage. So I always say just stick with feelings. Like, how are you really doing? Like, please just let me know what's going on. And I guess you need to build that trust and that connection, and then just really sensitively say, you know, express your concern. And you can do that in a gentle way. But I always think having that really hard conversation is important, because so often the person with an eating disorder won't recognise it themselves. We know that people aren't reaching out for help. So actually it does involve our community, people around us, having that conversation. And once again, Beat have some really good guidance on how to have that conversation. So do take a look, ring the helpline.
We will put all of the numbers and links in the show notes if you want to get those. Jess Griffiths, thank you so much for coming on The Life of Bryony and having this open therapy session with me. It's been amazing, and I'll see you on Friday for Q&As.
It's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much to Jess for that. Her ability to demystify something as complex as binge eating disorder is kind of remarkable. If this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to check out Jess's book called Eating Disorders, The Basics, which covers all sorts of different eating disorders. Or visit Beat for practical advice and support. Links are, of course, in the show notes. Remember, you are not alone in this. Seeking help or asking for it is not a sign of weakness, but one of the bravest steps you can take. And I always think that if you ask for help and if you reach out and let people know that you need help, you're sort of being a mental health advocate in yourself, because when we speak about our truths and when we allow ourselves to be counted and acknowledged, we're helping lots of other people. The more that we are honest about this, the more people are able to create resources that help others with it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's a really important thing to remember when you're scared of asking for help, that in asking for help, you are doing really important mental health advocacy. Because if we don't report it, the powers that be don't know how much help is needed for it. Back on Friday for the Life of You. Until then, take care.